Hello, Klaus. So we'll start off chapter one of our lecture. We'll be doing chapters one to three, and so let's begin. All right. So chapter one covers communication. Chapter two has to do with perception, and chapter three has to do with communication and personal identity. And our story starts out with Mike's story, and you can read it in the book. The text or lecture text will be used throughout this course. There is no opportunity where the course where the book will not be used, right? We're going to be doing chapter by chapter. So it will be one of those books that you will have to use. You won't be putting it down. Also, it will have been shared with you. You can go on the Orion system and download the book, right? It is made available to you by the Department of Communication Studies so that you are able to read on your own in your own time and also view the lectures so that when we come to our classroom settings, it is a review process. So it's not something where you are hearing this for the first time, but it's actually a review session, right? All right, so we'll be answering the question, why do people study communication, right? So communication is a formal study, and the learning about communication and practicing communication, it can improve our skills. Also, theories and principles help us understand our lives better, and they help us have personal impact, right? So that is what a little bit of why people go into studying communication, right? Improve our skills, make us more aware of what is going on around us, help us to understand what other people are trying to say, be open minded to what other people are trying to say, and not just be closed minded. So that is how it makes our lives better. And it can, of course, impact us on a personal, professional level, right? Social level. So we're going into answering the question, what is communication? So communication is a systemic process in which people interact with and through symbols to create and interpret meaning. Now, we are going to go into further into the parts of the definition that are underlined. So you'll see there that systemic process is underlined, symbols are also underlined, and interpret meaning is also in bold and underlined, right? So we'll be going in detail into those aspects of it and kind of have a little breakdown of the definition. So let's start with the communication process, right? So remember, we had said that it is a systemic process, and this is what this systemic process may look like. You realize everything is intertwined and everything is going into each other. So communication is a process because it is ongoing and always in motion, moving ever forward and changing continually. It cannot be frozen, even silence communicates, right? And communication is also systemic, right? Because it occurs in a system of interrelated parts that affect one another. So you can see that in our diagram, right? Everything flows into everything, everything influences everything at some point. And as we go further on into the chapter, you will get an understanding of what this means, why everything will flow into each other and everything has an effect on each other. And communication is always ongoing. It never stops, never ceases. And as I said, even silence communicates, right? All right. So let's talk about communication where as it relates to family, which is normally the first place that we learn to communicate. When you're born in a family, and your family will expose you a lot to socializing first before you even go out into the the real world and be a part of society. Your family has an influence over you. So each family member is a part of the system. When it comes on to the physical environment, you have living room conversations different from bedroom conversations. There are certain things that you can talk about in your bedroom that you definitely cannot talk about in the living room with everybody sitting there. Isn't that correct, right? So you have living room conversation, you have bedroom conversations, you have certain conversations that you would never have outside of the house, right? And you will have them inside the house because it is private, right? But you wouldn't dare go outside and have that type of a conversation. So that is where we talk about the physical environment, how the physical environment will affect communication. The time of day also affects communication. Are you a morning person? Are you a midday person? Because of course, if you are a morning person, you're going to wake up top of the morning very chirpy, right? And this is going to be obvious to everyone, and you're communicating that I'm a happy-go-lucky person in the morning. Now, for a person that likes to wake up at midday, of course, this is going to be like almost an offense to a person that likes to wake up a little later on in the morning. You coming in, bursting into a room, and you pull the curtains and you let in the sunshine and all of that, you're going to make somebody else miserable. And of course, that person is going to communicate how annoyed they are with the idea that, you are this morning person that comes and disrupts and they're not ready to start their day as yet, right? I'm sure you've heard people talk about, don't talk to me unless I've had my coffee, or don't talk to me unless I've had something to eat. That sort of a thing, right? So, our the physical environment, the time of day, all of these elements affect how we communicate in life, right? So these are all a part of the system of communication. All right, so let's move on. Let's say, still on the family communication, let's say you have a family, right? If a family has a history of listening sensitively and working out problems constructively, and then when one family member says, "There's something we need to talk about," the comment is unlikely to cause a defensiveness. On the other hand, if the family has a record of nasty conflicts, then the same comment might arouse strong defensiveness. Right? You understand that point? Or what we're really talking about is how it is that your family normally deals with things. Are you a family that is open to communication? Are you close to communication? Is it that communication creates this big disagreement whenever you guys communicate, so you don't bother to communicate? It's already difficult being in the same space or living in the same house, that much less talking to each other just go and make things worse, so you just avoid the whole experience altogether. So this scenario is talking about a situation where of two families. One, they are very open to communication. They're always talking. So of course, if somebody were to walk into the room and say, "There's something we need to talk about," it's going to be easy for that family to open up and sit down and talk about whatever the issue may be, right? But think about a family that they don't often get along and they barely talk. Of course, it is going to create problems, right? And they will probably waste a lot of time talking in circles and arguing in circles and being defensive before they even fully hear what the other person has to say, right? So we already know what the likely outcome would be. All right. So these are even through these things you have communication, right? The bumper sticker on your car communicates something. Your license plate, it communicates, doesn't it? It communicates to the police and even to other people that are going to report you to the police, right? Art communicates. The way how you wear your hair communicates. The things that you wear on your body communicates. Your clothes communicates. Road sign communicates. So there some everything is always communicating around you. It's always communicating something, and there's something to gain from whatever it is. As long as you're able to see, hear, and smell, right? There is a level of communication that is always happening. All right. So symbols happen through verbal and non-verbal symbols, right? This is the symbol part of the definition, right? So we dealt with the process, we dealt with the systemic process. We're dealing with this with symbols now, and then we'll go on into meaning. So let's look at symbols. All right. So in as it relates to symbols, communication can be abstract, meaning it is intangible, non-figurative. Anything and everything communicates. Can be arbitrary. It's a random choice. It's off the whim, or it can be ambiguous. More than one interpretations can be sought from it, right? You can come up with different interpretations of the one thing. Five of you can be looking at the same thing, and five of you walk away with five different interpretations of the one thing, right? So that is what it means by it being ambiguous. So communication happens through verbal and nonverbal symbols, or abstract, arbitrary, and ambiguous. And we'll go into that some more as we go on throughout our course. Now let's look at the word get lost, right? And this has to do with the meaning portion of the definition, how meanings are interpreted in communication. So communication involves meaning, or the heart of communication has to do with meaning. Content level of meaning, is it a literal message or is it a not so literal message, right? So let's look at the word get lost, right? When it has to do with the content level of the meaning, depending on who is saying it, it's going to have an impact on how you will interpret the meaning, right? So you can either take it literal or not literal. And then there is a second part to it. Apart from the content level of meaning, there is also the relationship level of meaning. Same word, same words, get lost. Same statement, get lost, right? Now, depending on the relationship that you have with the person that is communicating the words get lost, it will determine how you will also interpret it, right? So, let's say the words get lost was being said by your friend in a joking, smiling way. Of course, you're going to say that this person is being playful, right? But let's say the words came out of your boss's mouth after you have asked him for a raise. Of course, you're going to interpret that as him being offensive, right? How dare he say such a thing to you? You're going to be bothered by it, right? So different levels are influenced by meaning in communication, right? Different levels, meaning content in terms of the level, a relationship in terms of the level. All of that decides how it is that you are going to interpret the meaning behind words, or behind a particular um, painting, or behind a particular symbol. Whatever it is, whatever the relationship is between you and the thing, or the content of the thing is going to communicate to you. Depending on who, what, where the communication happens, the rules are open to change. All right. So let's talk about the value of communication. So, communication shapes our personal, professional, social lives, as well as the culture in which we live, right? So, let's look at we're going to look at the personal values and the professional values. So, as remember, we said personal, professional, social, cultural, but we're going to be looking at the personal and the professional, right? So, personal value. In the earliest years of our lives, family members tell us who we are. So remember when I said that your family is the first place that you learn really to socialize. That's where you will gain a lot of information that will basically prepare you for what is to come, what society will bring. So if hopefully we you got a good foundation, right, from you were a baby coming up, so that you would have a healthy perspective of things before you get out there and society has another influence on you, right? So things like you're smart, you're strong, you're a clown, you're very funny, you're hilarious, that sort of a things. These things affect how you grow as a child. If you continue to hear positive things, if you continue to hear negative things, it impacts you, right? And it shapes how you move about in society when you get out there. Later, we interact with teachers, friends, romantic partners, co workers, right? And they communicate how they perceive us, right? Thus, how we see ourselves reflects the view of us that others communicate. So, it's very important why the first influence that you have in your life is a positive one, because if you don't have that stable, solid foundation of understanding of yourself that builds confidence for you, it can create mayhem for you in later years to come. All right, so let's look at the professional value, right? Communication skills affect professional success. In our professional life, the cost of poor communication is great. And we will talk about this in our review session about this statement. The cost of poor communication is great, and we're going to be talking about that statement and expounding more on that statement. In the workplace, poor communication means that errors and misunderstandings occur. Messages must be repeated, productivity suffers, and sometimes people lose jobs. No matter what your career goals are, developing strong communication skills will enhance your professional success. All right? So as long as you are always learning more about how to communicate better, you can't be miserable all the time. And you surely can't bring your miserableness to your coworkers or your boss, right? Or if you are a boss and you're a leader, you being miserable all the time is not the best way to communicate to your subordinates. Am I correct? Right? You cannot do that, because it will, of course, create a very toxic environment, right? And maybe we have had such an experience, right? Wherein you've had maybe a toxic boss or a toxic coworker or somebody that you just can't get along with because of how they communicate or how you communicate with them. And you will say things like, you're not a plan peace, that type of thing. We just don't get along, we don't see eye to eye, that sort of a thing. So in learning how to communicate better, in learning to open up your mind and your thoughts to other people and their possibilities of how they look at life, being open-minded to how they speak, what their experiences have been like, will help you to understand them. And then if they learn how to communicate better as well, they will be able to understand you, and then you will have a nice little environment that everybody can grow and everybody can feel safe in that environment to be able to be expressive and to know that whatever it is that they're saying will be taken in a positive way, even if it's criticism, because criticism can also be positive, right? So we're moving on now to the models of communication. So theorists created models to describe how things work. Over the years, scholars in communication have developed a number of models which reflect increasingly sophisticated understandings of the communication process. So, the models of communication that we'll be talking about are, maybe you've heard of them, the linear, the interactive, which is also called the interactional, right? And then there is the transactional model of communication. And we're going to delve a little deeper into those right about now. So the linear model looks something like this. It includes a single sender and a single receiver, right? Later on, it extends to include how noise affects communication. Now, an example of this type of a communication is radio or a newspaper back in the day, not necessarily now, because things have evolved so much that now you can interact. But think about a linear model, probably say maybe the last 15 years or 20 years ago, where the newspaper would come to you and you cannot, all you get is the newspaper. There is no actual feedback. You read what you read, and you move on. But as the years went by, they started opening up to different ways of communicating with the persons that prepare the newspaper. So you have columns like letter to the editor, right? Where people can, after reading the newspaper, you can pen a letter and you can send it in, and it is published as letter to the editor, right? So that is you able to communicate. But think of it before all that. Think, all right, let's look at radio. Radio before the calling, being able to call in, and Barbara Gludon's calling, and Motty Perkins calling, for those of you who are old enough to remember, right? Calling segments. Our Empress right now, Empress Golden and Miss Kitty, they're able to have calling sessions with their listeners. But before that, there was just basically the radio playing a lot of music, and there was no interaction between the listeners and the presenter, right? So you did not have a twofold communication back and forth. You only had a one way, which is absorbing whatever it is that was coming to you, right? So it's a one-sided sort of a view. There is no feedback, none of that. But noise came on the scene later on, and the noise can be anything that affects that thing. So let's say it's radio. It can be that feedback that you hear in the line when say you finally find the channel and you hear a this frying sound, right? That is noise, right? It can also be whatever it is going on in your background. Like maybe there is a lot of chaos going on in your background while you're trying to listen to the radio, and you're telling people around you that, listen, I'm listening to the radio, please stop the noise. Right? That is what we talk about when we're talking about noise. Anything that interrupts the flow of communication for you, right? All right, so let's move on now to the interactive model. So the interactive model looks something like what you're seeing on the screen, includes feedback, responses to messages as part of the model. For example, text messages, video conference call, there is a back and forth. There's sender, receiver, receiver becomes sender, and it's back and forth. You are able to talk, the person is able to hear you, the person is able to answer you, and you can answer the person, and you guys can communicate back and forth. Communicators create and interpret messages within a personal field of experience. The more communicators fields of experience overlap, the better they understand each other. Right? So the more you talk, the more you understand each other. Now let's move on to the transactional model. Now the transactional model looks something like this. It's the interactive, right? But it's still the interactive, but a little bit more, right? So sender becomes receiver, receiver becomes sender, and there's noise going on. There maybe even is talk over each other, that sort of a thing. So so in the transactional model, right? Think about a conversation that you'll be having with your friend in the middle of a town. Let's say downtown Kingston, right? One, recognize that everyone involved in the communication both sends and receives messages, often simultaneously. Communication changes over time as a result of what's happening between the people. So let's say this conversation is downtown, right? You buck up your friend that you haven't seen in so long, right? Because of what is going on around. Because remember, the rest of downtown Kingston is doing what they normally do. Is if they're not selling, they're trying to get on with their business. They're trying to go where they want to go, right? So of course they're going to be affected by all of that. So in you bucking up your friend and saying, "Hi, how you doing, girl?" or whatever the case may be, however you greet people, right? You may end up having to talk louder to talk over the noise, right? So you may find yourself that you are shouting. So this is how your environment is affected, right? And you probably have to end up talking louder and louder as you go on, because the taxi man pass and him honking, or people honking their car while they're passing, and people talking loudly, and the people that selling, they are selling loudly, and they're talking loudly to try to get people to attention to buy their wares and all of that, right? Then you have communication includes both external and internal noise. So let's say in the middle of the conversation, you're thinking about the fact that, if I don't hurry up and finish this conversation with my friend, I'm going to miss my bus. Because look, I was already late to get to this point. And now me see her, me stop, me have to talk to her, right? But you're still thinking about the possibility that, oh, my boss is going to drive up at any minute and I might miss it. And I'm nowhere near where the bus stop is, or I'm way over here, so the bus stop is way over there, right? So this is an internal noise that happens within you. Or you might be having a conversation and you're thinking about the fact that you're hungry. Lord, we really need to get home, go eat something, right? Or me can't wait for sit in the bus so me can eat whatever I just buy because I'm hungry, right? These are internal noises. So apart from the external noise that's going on around you, you have internal noises that is going on within you that also affect your communication with your friend, right? Communication is a continuous, ongoing process. So think about the conversation. You've decided that, okay, here what, girl, I will text you, right? We can finish up the conversation. Let me text you, and you both hug and you walk off, and you go in and you get into your bus. Finally, communication is continuous in that it is an ongoing process. So let's say you go into the bus and you take out your phone same time and you say you're going to text your friend. You can continue the conversation, right? And it can be an ongoing conversation because now you've gone on a device and you're still communicating. Oh, girl, what you did that say about whatever what we were talking about a while ago. What? I didn't know that was what happened, and that sort of a thing. And you're still communicating. It's just that you're using a different device. So this is what it means by it's continuous and ongoing. It flows into something else. Oh, and guess what? Other people are able to view you that are sitting in the bus and seeing you on your phone and figure that you're talking to somebody else, right? Or let's say you take up the same phone and you decide to call a friend and you guys are talking, and and you are talking in the bus very loudly and everybody is able to hear your conversation in the bus, right? And it's still a communication because these people around you will be hearing what it is that you have to say and will be interpreting what you have to say to your friend. Like, they will also be thinking in their internal noise, and sometimes it become external. Lord, that woman a loudie. Why she talk so loud in the bus and I make Anna tell everybody her business? Communication is still ongoing, right? Communication occurs within systems that themselves affect communication and the meaning. So let's say you are in the bus having a conversation and you get distracted by somebody that passing you in the bus. Let's say somebody start quarrel with you about being so loud in the bus on your phone. Until they say, lady, you can't keep it down. You just disturb the rest of me. And you get distracted and you decide to stop the phone conversation to argue with the person in the bus. Right? So the other person on the phone is thinking that, boy, where she gone? Oh, she gone quarrel with somebody and me and her have conversation. And then it just comes off as you're not interested in the conversation that you guys are having, or it's not that important anymore, right? So your friend is left to interpret a meaning, to give a meaning to whatever it is that is going on, and even the people around you are interpreting a meaning to what is going on as well, right? And our last point, as it relates to transactional model, is senders and receivers are defined as communicators who participate actively in the communication process. So everybody that becomes a part of the whole thing, the person that you and them end up arguing because they're talking too loud in the bus, the person that you're on the phone with is a part of the communication. Whatever it is that is going on around you, everybody else is impacted by what it is that you're doing, and you're impacted by what they're doing as well. Right? And that is what happens in the communication process. Everybody becomes an active participant in the process. Right? So let's move on now to the breadth of the communication field. Communication disciplines date back to more than 2,000 years ago with a man called Aristotle. Now, you probably maybe have heard about Aristotle. So Aristotle was one of the greatest philosophers who ever lived and the first genuine scientist in history. He made pioneering contributions to all fields of philosophy and science, and he invented the field of formal logic, and he identified the various scientific disciplines and explored their relationship to each other. Right? Now, we're going to be looking at a few quotes that Aristotle um, have came up with over the years or shared over the years. And during our review session, we will be talking a little bit about those. All right. All right. So, although public speaking remains a vital skill, which is what Aristotle used to do back in his time, he would have had to speak a lot out there, to go on podiums and talk to people out loud, to get people inspired, to get people riled up about things. So that is how he came about as being a philosopher, right? He would need to be genuine or even appear genuine in some type of way to give people inspiration, right? So of course, if it is that you are going to start out with the intrapersonal part of communication, so you no longer, all right, so let's start with intrapersonal, which has to do with the communication or the self-talk that we do with ourselves, right? And then we're going to move over into the other areas of communication. So we move away from ourselves, which is, and we go on to communicating with others, sort of like how Aristotle used to do it, right? And he would have to be in front of these large crowds, similar to our prime minister, um, Mr. Holness, right? Prime Minister Holness talking to crowds of people, or previous prime ministers talking to crowds of people, or ministers, whoever they are, talking to crowds of people and getting them riled up and into the whole political thing, right? And wanting to get your vote for you to agree with them and that sort of a thing, right? And you have to learn you have to move from talking to yourself, how you talk to yourself, how you communicate with yourself, and you move on into the interpersonal, which is talking to people. Then you have what is called group communication. So you move on from just talking um, to people one on one to two on two, three on three, and it keeps on growing. And then you go on to group communication, right? So social groups, decision making committees, work teams. So you've realized that you now need to talk more to more groups of people. Organizational communication, understanding about identity and codes of thought and action shared by members of your organization. So that is what organizational communication is about. Then you have mass communication and social media. All of these are all communication tools that are used today, right? And we influence our thinking, they influence our thinking and how other people also think and how we relate to each other. All right. Then we move on to public communication, a little bit more of what Aristotle does or did, and what Mr. Wholeness also does right now, right? Public communication between one and many people. Intercultural communication, increase the awareness of different cultures and communication practice. Now, that is what intercultural communication is about. And we're going to go into cultural communication later on in our course. All right. All right. So that now brings us to chapter two. So we've wrapped up chapter one and we're moving on to chapter two, which has to do with perception and communication. So, so human perception concerns how we make sense of the world and what happens in it. Perception is an active process of selecting, organizing, and interpreting people, objects, events, situations, and activities. All right. So that is what perception is about. It's the active process of selecting, organizing, and interpreting people or objects or an event, a situation, or an activity. All right. So you're going to select, organize, and then you're going to interpret. Right. All right. So let's look at selection first. So selection. Let me just bring up everything. Has to do with selection. So selection of stimuli is the first step in perception. We may deliberately influence what we notice, self-indication. We select based on who we are and what is going on inside us, right? There are things that you see that maybe somebody else would overlook, but because that is important to you or that is a conversation that you've had with yourself, you automatically pick that out like a needle in a haystack because it has an effect on you or it has had an effect on you. So you pick that out while other people, you know, it's almost nothing for them because they're not influenced by the way that you are, right? Our expectations influence what we notice, and this has to do with self-fulfilling prophecy, and we'll talk some more about that later on in the course in chapter 3 to be exact, right? So that is what the selection process is about. You see it and know and you select what about it you're going to take and what it is that you're going to throw away. What is going to influence you and what is not going to influence you. What you are going to take away from it, what you're going to learn and what you won't learn. Right? So that is what the selection is about. And all of that information that you've gotten, that you've selected, you're going to organize it now. Right? Organization of stimuli helps us to make sense of it. Constructivism is a theory that says we organize and interpret experience by applying four types of cognitive structures called schemata, right? Or schema for is a singular for that, right? So these schematas, you will see them over on the right hand side. There is prototype, personal construct, stereotype, and scripts. So let's start out with prototype. Prototype is a knowledge structure that defines the clearest and most representative example of some category. Example, you probably have a prototype of an excellent teacher, all right? A true friend, a great public speaker. Wait, let me see if, right, see them there. All right, so we're looking at prototype. So you probably have a prototype of an excellent teacher, a true friend, great public speaker, a perfect romantic partner. So Each of these categories is exemplified by a person who is the ideal case. That is what you call your prototype. So let's say when you were in grade four, or you used to go to primary school, you had this teacher and her name is Miss Green. And Miss Green used to teach math so well. And because Miss Green used to teach math so well, and Miss Green used to pick you out of everybody in the class, and she used to compliment you for how great your math skills were, and she would take the time to teach you a little more about mathematics and so forth. You felt like Miss Green is a great maths teacher. So what will happen is when you go to high school, you are looking for a similar teacher to Miss Green, because that is what to you a good maths teacher should look like. So Miss Green becomes your prototype, right? And you are going to gain your wherever you go, even after you leave high school and you go to university. Let's say you're still learning maths. If this person don't take the same trend that Miss Green take, this person is not a great maths teacher. So same thing for a romantic partner or even a true friend, right? A good public speaker. If this person, the person that you have placed on this pedestal in your mind and in your thoughts, that this person is the greatest of all of this thing, then it will decide how it is that you will interpret and organize other people later on, right? And it will affect your perception of what it is that you've seen. So, say Obama is for you the best public speaker in the world. You are going to expect that every public speaker is supposed to have a similar persona or a similar way of presenting, just like Obama. So, Obama becomes your prototype. All right. When it comes on to personal construct, we're still on the schematals that has to do with organization, how you organize perception, right? So you selected and now you're organizing. So when we're talking about the personal construct, this is a measuring yardstick or description that allows us to position people and situations along a bipolar dimension of judgment. For example, personal constructs are intelligent or not intelligent, responsible or not responsible, kind, not kind, attractive or not attractive, right? We place people in categories by judging them sometimes very early after meeting them. So you meet her for 2 seconds and you already size her up. This is not a good teacher, right? You haven't even gone two classes into the course, but you just write her off because she's not a good teacher, or she's not an intelligent group member, because that day when you met with her, she was late. The first day of the group meeting, she was late, so she automatically she's just a late bug, yeah, that type of a thing, right? So that is what personal construct is. It's a mental yardstick that allows you to position people, right? And situations along a bipolar dimension of judgment. So that is what we're talking about. Next, we move on to stereotypes. Now, stereotypes are predictive generalizations about people and situations. Stereotypes may be accurate or inaccurate, right? And we've all had situations where we've been stereotyped in some type of way, or we know of situations where stereotypes were involved, right? For example, Jamaican taxi men, what do we say about them, right? Asian people, what do we say about them? Back road, what happens in back road? Politicians, what happens? What do politicians do? That people, all of us somehow have the idea that that is all politicians do. And it's the same thing with female drivers. You know, there is this stereotype thing that a lot of the times happen. We don't even know that it's happening sometimes when it's happening in our thoughts. Or you will just say it out of your mouth and not even be thinking that, that there's actually stereotyping someone without even having all the facts, right? Then we move on to what is called scripts. Scripts are guides to action based on what we've experienced and observed. A script consists of a sequence of activities that define what we and others are expected to do in a specific situation. Example: a taxi man drives up beside you in traffic. Are you on alert or preparing for the worst? Right? So it's a script. It's an idea that you formed in your head of what to expect. So this taxi man drive up beside you, and remember, you already have this preconceived notion that, oh, well, this taxi man he might go bad drive me. So you've placed yourself on alert and you're preparing for the worst, right? So much so that let's say him don't bad drive you and him actually wait on you to go ahead. Or he's the one that honks his horn and gives you the go ahead to go in front of him. What? That would be like such a weird occurrence. A taxi man. Wait, him not nowhere to go. That sort of a thing. You'd be in so much disbelief that this cannot be a taxi man. Something wrong, right? So a script is almost like you expect a certain type of behavior from a certain sort of person that you've already stereotyped, right? All right, so let's sum it up now. What we're talking about when it comes on to schemata. So what you're seeing on the screen, as we listen, we organize and interpret experience by applying the four cognitive schemata. Which prototype, what friend, what good friend, person in trouble, student, teacher, do they closely resemble? That's the thought that you have in your head in terms of your prototype, right? Then we apply the personal construct to define more detail. Are they upset or calm, open to advice or close to advice? So you have placed them in a personal construct in your thoughts, right? Then after you have placed them in a personal construct, then you're going to, based on your construct of your judgment, right? Based on your construct of others, we apply stereotype. How has this person reacted in the past? How this situation similar to others, and that predict what they will do next, right? And then after you have stereotyped them, then you will apply what is called script. So you expect them to act a certain way, right? And when they do, you're like, see, but they tell you. Or let's say they don't, and you're like, no man, something wrong. But that I know, that's another taxi man when me did expect. Taxi man behavior that me did expect. A taxi man waving me to go on before him. What? Impossible. That sort of a thing, right? So that's just basically a sum up of what interpretation is supposed to look like. Inter Next in the process of interpretation, we assign meanings. We must interpret what we have noticed and organize. Interpretation is a subjective process of explaining perceptions to assign meanings to them. Right? So attributions have to do with interpretation. Attributions are explanations of why things happen and why people act as they do. It's good to remind ourselves that the attributions that we make aren't necessarily correct. They are our subjective way of assigning meanings, right? And I should be sharing a video with you that will clear up, give you a little more insight on interpretation and how it works, right? So I will share that video with you. All right, let's move on to what is called self-serving bias. This is a part of interpretation as well. All right, so self-serving bias says that we tend to construct attributions that serve our personal interest This bias can distort our perception, which can be harmful, right? Now, so we'll talk a little bit more in our review session about self-serving bias, but from what you're seeing from the image in front of you on the slide, you'll see that say the result is good as it relates to you. Say the result is good, you take credit for it. If it's bad, then you blame others. So that is what self-serving bias is about. So you basically have taken the credit for something just because it is related to something good. Oh, it must be how great I am or how good I am at that. Why the outcome is so wonderful, right? But if it's bad, you find everything else around you to blame except yourself, and you blame others, you blame other things, you blame the weather, right? You blame everything else except yourself. That is what a self serving bias is about. So you don't want to hear about anything else. As long as it is good, it is me. And as long as it is bad, it's something else or somebody else that has caused it, right? That is what self serving bias is about. So let's look at another type of bias, which is called the confirmation bias. We must also be careful of using confirmation biases. The tendency to search for, recall, and interpret information, to suit already held beliefs. Right? So examples of conformative conformative bias is not seeking out objective facts, interpreting information to support your existing beliefs, only believe remembering details that uphold your belief and ignoring information that challenges your belief. Hmm? Sound familiar? That is what is called a confirmation bias. So it's not necessarily that you're finding enough information, whatever you find as information is facts, It can be just that those are the information that you're looking for, right? So of course you're going to find enough that backs up your view, right? So you have to that is something that you also have to be careful of as you go about communication in society. So let's talk a little bit about we're winding down chapter two was let's go. Influences on perception. So you have the physiological influence, the cultural, the social roles. These all of these affect our affect perception. So the physiological, let's talk about that. So physiology, sorry, influences our perception because people differ in their sensory abilities and physiologies, right? Senses influence our perception. Physiological states influence perception. So the state that you are in your physiology, right? It is automatically going to affect your perception. And age also affects your perception, right? All right, so I'm going to look at the picture in front of you on the slide. You're seeing an elephant, and if you notice too, all of the persons that are holding different parts of the elephant, they're all wearing glasses, which suggests that they're all blind. So, of course, everybody will have a different idea, right, of what it is that they're feeling because remember they're all blind so they don't even know what they're feeling, but each of them have a different part of the elephant. So it could be a situation that the person that has the tail right now may be feeling it and thinking that maybe this is a rope. The person that has the leg may feel it and think that it's a tree trunk, right? That sort of a thing. So because they are physically challenged in terms of their eyesight is not there, they're all blind. it will affect their perception. It's the same way if you are unable to smell, if you're unable to hear, right? If all your senses aren't intact or one is missing, it's going to affect your perception, right? All right, moving on. Culture also affects perception, right? And it affects it in a powerful way. A culture consists of values, understanding, practices, and ways of interpreting experiences that are shared by a number of people. So when you look at this photo here, this picture here, you will also see how culture affects your perception, right? Depending on the the culture that you are from, whatever is this the young lady is wearing on the left can be seen as too conservative, right? And whatever the lady on the right is wearing may be considered to be very provocative because it's tight and short and all of that. So that's considered provocative. But in some other cultures, it's not provocative. That is actually how you normally dress to go to work. That sort of a thing. So depending on the culture that you're from, it of course is going to influence how you see things. Let's move on to how social roles affect our perception. Social roles in terms of others communicate with to us how others communicate to us influences our perceptions. For example, how boys are raised different from girls. So boys are raised with this idea that they should ride bicycles, they should know how to do construction, they should know how to use a hammer, they should know how to fix cars, that sort of a thing. While girls are raised, and this, of course, is not across the board and it's not set in stone for everyone. But this is socially what normally happens, right? Girls are expected to stay inside the house. They're expected to paint their nails. They're expected to do makeup and to do certain things. So when you see anything else outside of that norm, it can be uncomfortable for you, right? Or it may take a person a long time before they can grow out such a idea or what has been an influence over them by their social roles. Whether they were raised that way, whether society pushed them into that box and told them that this is how you have to see life and do life, right? And even the picture on the left where it concerns colors. So women are thought to know more than just a few colors. While men, if a man knows more, if a man look at a color and see more than just pink and see about 10 other colors, other shades of pink, he would be considered weird or gay, depending on the situation, right? So, as you can see, the lady she's seen, she in the pink section, she's seen strawberry, she's seen bubblegum, magenta, right? Well, him all he sees is pink. And this is a perception that we have, and we think that men aren't supposed to know colors, which isn't true, right? And we assume that women supposed to know colors, which is not always true, always the case, right? It's not always the case. And these are all things that we have grown up learning and absorbing over time, whether through our parents, our society has left us with these ideas in our head, right? All right. We will talk more about cognitive complexity in our review session. We will also talk about the 5 guidelines for enhancing competence, right? So we will discuss these, and we are now at chapter 3. So, chapter 3 has to do with communication and personal identity, and the personal identity in terms of the self. So the self is a process that involves internalizing and acting from social perspectives that we learn in the process of communication. All right, all right, here I am. So, the first important influence on how we see ourselves is our family. Remember that I said I talked about foundation of where you start. That is how you're going to see yourself, right? And let's talk a little bit about attachment styles. So, those of you who have done psychology, you may be exposed to this sort of a topic that has to do with our attachment styles. This is new for some, but not new for others, depending on the situation or your experience, right? Attachment styles are patterns of parenting that teach us who we are and others are and how to relate to others. So you have what is called secure attachment styles. And this is developed when the primary caregiver responds in a consistently attentive and loving way to a child, right? That is a secure attachment. So as you can see in the diagram, I don't worry about being abandoned or about someone getting too close to me. Then you have what is called a fearful attachment style. So fearful attachment styles are cultivated when a caregiver communicates a negative, rejecting, or abusive way to communicate, right? Then you have what is called a dismissive attachment style, which leads us to dismiss others as unworthy, right? And then you have the anxious attachment style. It is fostered by an inconsistent treatment from the caregiver. So when you look at the diagram, you're seeing the anxious, where it says, I want to be extremely emotionally close with others, but they abandon me. So that is what um, the anxious attachment style will appear as, right? I want to be extremely emotionally close with others, but they abandon me. Then you have the fearful avoidant. I trust issues and maintain distance from people, from others, right? So this most times is the fearful attachment style. So the fearful avoidant, they don't trust issues and they maintain their distance. While the dismissive and the avoidant, they sound like a similar thing where you dismiss others as unworthy. I am very important. It is very important that I feel independent and self-sufficient. All right. So that is what how these attachment styles will show up in others in others and ourselves, right? Depending on the foundation that we were exposed to growing up or the family structure that we came out of. All right. So after you're finished with self, you move on to the second major influence on our self concept is our peers, right? This is when we go out into society and we're bucking up others that have to deal with us. Social comparisons are social comparisons are comparisons of ourselves with others to form judgments of our talents, attractiveness, abilities, leadership skills, etc. Assessing similarities and differences allows us to see with whom we fit, right? By us thinking about how others see us and how we see ourselves, how others receive us and how we receive ourselves is going to determine where in life do we fit, which type of crowd do we fit in with, who is the best people to talk to, who will make you feel the most important, and who will run you over like a bulldozer because you are of no consequence or no use to them, right? We move on from our peers and we move into the third influence that it has on our self concept. it is how we interact with society in general. Perspectives of society surface as we communicate with others who have internalized cultural values and express them to us. Social perspectives are also communicated through the media. So as you can see, the little baby there, he is following what he is seeing on the television, right? So the television is communicating something to him, and he's mimicking that same behavior, right? And a lot of times that is how things grow, how our concepts and our ideas grow, right? We see them in the media, or they're exposed to us over time, how society deals with or says certain things and what society labels things as. And that is something that we internalize and we take in, we learn, and we regurgitate and think that it is a new concept or a concept that is actually coming from us, which it is never coming from us. It is coming from the society that you are a part of. Because there's no way you can be in a society and not be influenced in some type of way, if it's even in the most small or minute way, right? And the 4th influence we may have, communication shapes the self through self fulfilling prophecy. And let me explain this. So, self fulfilling prophecy has to do with if you have done poorly in class, in which teachers didn't seem to respect you, and have done well with teachers who thought you were smart, then you know what a self fulfilling prophecy is. The prophecies that we act to fulfill usually are first communicated to us by others because we often internalize others' perspectives. We may act to fulfill the label, right? So, what will happen is whatever people think of you or say of you, that is what you become, so to speak, right? It is shaped by what people say. So it's fulfilling the prophecy, right? And you become, if them keep on saying that you're worthless or you're a dog or you're a this, then you become that dog and you become worthless. If that is what people are continuously pouring into you, it's like after a time you may end up believing it. Unless you are going to be somewhat a person that is not influenced by everything or what people say, which is very difficult, especially if you are young and you're influential and you're growing up and you're still trying to understand yourself. It can be hard to get away from that. It's a bit more on self. Self is multidimensional, which means that you have a physical self, a cognitive self, an emotional self, a social self. And what these are, the physical self refers to our physical description of ourselves. Cognitive self refers to how we think. The emotional refers to how we feel. And the social self refers to how we interact with other people. So these are all a part of us, right? How we feel, how we think, how we interact with others, how we physically describe ourselves, right? Are all a part of things that make us up. Also, self is a process. And what this means is self develops over time. We develop egos, boundaries, which determine where the self stops and the rest of the world begins. So it's a process where you start now, which is not where you will be in another 2, 3 years from now, right? Where you are, the perspective that you have now about yourself, you may want to change that because you may be, say, you're very critical of yourself, and maybe you come in contact with somebody that tells you, no man, you need to lighten up and you need to give yourself a break, that can maybe go on to affect you in such a way that you start to really look at it and say, it's true. I really need to stop doing that, being so overly critical of myself, and give myself some grace, right? And you start to go out and present yourself differently, right? So that's just what it means when we say that self is a process. It develops over time, right? You develop boundaries, and you decide what you are going to take from people to put into your thoughts and to keep with you, or you just don't take it in at all because it is of no use to you and you let it roll off your back. That sort of a thing. So that's how you develop boundaries for yourself to protect yourself, right? And in our review session, we'll be discussing enhancing self and the guidelines that we can use to enhance ourselves and to do better in the end, right? All right, so we'll also be talking about how digital media affects our personal identity, right? We'll also talk a little bit about that in our next session. All right, so we're at the end of our first three chapters, chapters 1, 2, and 3. And of course, our next lecture will be on chapters 4 and 7. Hope this was a good one for you. Have a good day.